What unfolds when a conceited receptionist attempts to embarrass a modestly dressed guest at a lavish New York hotel, unaware that the woman is actually Taylor Swift? To make matters worse, she is oblivious to the fact that Keanu Reeves is about to enter the hotel and dramatically change the situation in an unexpected way. You won't believe how this evening concludes. Before we proceed with this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because we have another special story for you tomorrow. The rain battered New York City that November night, turning the streets into shimmering mirrors reflecting the vibrant glow of streetlights and neon signs. Pedestrians hurried along the slick sidewalks, umbrellas tilted against the steady downpour. But one woman walked alone, her head low beneath the hood of her sweatshirt. The black cap she wore was a deliberate choice, a quiet shield against recognition. Taylor Swift took a deep breath as she approached the grand entrance of Baccarat, one of the city's most exclusive hotels. Fatigue weighed on her shoulders, yet her mind remained sharp. She needed a quiet retreat, a place to gather herself before an important event the following morning. It should have been simple, just check in and get some rest, but for someone like her, it rarely was. The moment she stepped through the revolving doors, a wave of warmth greeted her. The air was laced with the subtle aroma of jasmine and vanilla. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow across polished marble floors, while a pianist played a soft, melodious tune in the background. This was a place designed for those who sought luxury, discretion, and exclusivity. Taylor moved toward the reception desk. Behind it stood a young woman with an air of precision about her. Her posture impeccable, her uniform crisp, and her gaze meticulously assessing each arriving guest. The golden name tag pinned to her blazer read, Rose. Rose barely concealed her skepticism as Taylor approached. Her gaze flickered over the actress's simple outfit, an oversized sweatshirt, comfortable jeans, and well-worn sneakers. Taylor could almost hear the silent judgment forming in the receptionist's mind. "Good evening, how may I assist you?" Rose's voice was smooth, but carried a note of hesitation, as though she had already decided this guest did not belong. Taylor met her gaze with quiet confidence. "I have a reservation under the name T. Anna." Rose's well-manicured fingers danced over the keyboard, her eyes scanning the computer screen with what seemed to be surgical precision. A slight furrow appeared between her brows. "We don't have any VIP reservations under that name." Taylor had expected this. A flicker of amusement crossed her mind as she maintained her patient smile. "I can show you the confirmation," she offered, retrieving her phone and pulling up the email. She extended the device toward Rose. Rose hesitated before taking a cursory glance. Instead of acknowledging the confirmation, she exhaled softly, an almost imperceptible sigh of annoyance, before reaching for the phone on the desk, as if preparing for something more important. Taylor recognized the look in Rose's eyes. She had seen it before. It was the look of someone who judged first and asked questions later. Finally, Rose spoke again, her tone clipped. "Oh, of course. Let me check again." Yet, there was an unmistakable edge to her voice, something laced with subtle condescension. An uncomfortable silence settled between them as Rose continued typing. Across the lobby, a few guests had begun to notice the interaction. Nothing drew attention quite like an encounter thick with unspoken tension. Taylor folded her arms, waiting. She could feel Rose's gaze deliberately avoiding hers. And then, in a single sentence, Rose made a miscalculation that would change everything. "This hotel is for exclusive clients. Perhaps there's been some mistake." The implication was crystal clear. "Maybe you don't belong here." Taylor blinked slowly, absorbing the words. She was accustomed to being recognized in airports, at events, even in random coffee shops. But in this moment, Rose had no idea who she was speaking to, and maybe that was for the best. Or maybe not. Rose kept her fingers poised over the keyboard, her expression neutral but telling. Taylor knew exactly what was happening. This was not an oversight. This was a deliberate act. Rose had decided the woman in front of her did not meet the standards of Baccarat. "I'm quite sure the reservation was made here," Taylor said, her voice calm but firm. Rose's smirk barely wavered. "Well, our system isn't showing any confirmation under your name, but I can recommend a more affordable hotel a few blocks from here." Taylor remained composed, but the shift in the room was unmistakable. The couple by the fireplace had stopped their conversation. The man at the bar had lowered his drink, curiosity flickering in his eyes. This was no longer just a check-in issue. This was a spectacle. Rose wasn't simply denying a reservation. She was rejecting Taylor. "You didn't even check the system properly, did you?" Taylor asked, her tone still level, but now tinged with steel. Rose blinked, momentarily thrown off. "I'm just following procedures, ma'am. If you'd like, you're welcome to wait while I verify again." Taylor could see through the act. Rose was playing a game of power. Taking a slow breath, Taylor decided it was time to end this. "Is your manager available?" Rose's smirk deepened ever so slightly. "He's busy, but I can try checking once more." She turned her monitor slightly, as if genuinely looking something up. But Taylor caught the reflection in the glass behind the desk. The screen was still on the home page. Rose wasn't searching for anything. Irritation burned in Taylor's chest, but before she could respond, a faint click echoed across the room. Taylor's gaze flicked to the bar. A man in a tailored suit held his phone at chest level, pretending not to have just taken a photo. Recognition had dawned in his eyes, and if he recognized her, others soon would. The weight of exposure settled in. This wasn't just about a botched reservation anymore. This was about control, and her smirk grew. She sensed Taylor's vulnerability. "Miss Anna, why don't you wait in the lounge while we sort this out? I'm sure we can find something for you." The humiliation was now complete. Taylor's fingers twitched slightly, but before she could respond, another receptionist approached Rose and whispered something in her ear. Rose stiffened. Her gaze flicked from Taylor to the man at the bar, then back to Taylor's phone. Suspicion crept into her expression, but before she could say another word, the hotel doors swung open with force. A cold gust of wind swept into the lobby, carrying raindrops that shimmered under the golden glow of the chandeliers. The atmosphere shifted. Rose's head snapped toward the entrance. The security guard by the door straightened his stance. Conversations halted. Every head turned. And then he walked in, dressed in a tailored black suit and crisp white shirt. His presence commanded attention. His shoes, slightly damp from the rain, barely made a sound against the marble floor. Yet, every step he took felt weighted with purpose. His eyes swept across the room, taking everything in within seconds. Then, they found Taylor. The baseball cap she wore still shadowed part of her face, but it didn't matter. The moment their eyes met, a silent exchange passed between them, heavy with meaning. Rose swallowed hard. She didn't need confirmation. She could feel it in the air. Taylor didn't have to say a word. The man strode directly toward her, ignoring everyone else. The lobby fell silent, thick with unspoken tension. Then, with a soft, knowing smile, he spoke. "Is everything good here?" His voice was smooth, deliberate, but the impact of those words rippled through the space like a shockwave. She didn't need to ask who he was. Everyone knew. His name hadn't been spoken, yet the weight of his presence made it unnecessary. And in that moment, Rose understood one thing with crystal clarity. She had just made a mistake she would never forget. Keanu took a deep breath, his sharp gaze cutting through the tension. He looked at Rose, then did something no one in the room saw coming. The lobby of Baccarat was dead silent, the kind of silence that thickened the air, making it hard to breathe. Moments ago, Rose had been in control. Now, she was suffocating under the weight of her own actions. Because the man standing in front of her wasn't just any guest. It was Keanu Reeves. Perfectly tailored black suit, crisp white shirt, and shoes still damp from the rain. He exuded effortless elegance, a presence so magnetic it shifted the entire room's energy in an instant. But what truly made Rose's breath hitch wasn't just his name. It was the way he looked at Taylor. "Did I take too long?" he asked, his voice low, laced with subtle amusement. The words landed like an electric current, jolting everyone in the lobby. Rose blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was witnessing. Taylor. The woman she had just dismissed, the woman she had humiliated minutes ago, was now the center of attention. And Keanu Reeves was talking to her with a familiarity that shattered every assumption Rose had made. Taylor let out a slow breath, a small, knowing smile forming. "Oh, You know how much I love a good patience test." Keanu's eyes sparkled. The room remained motionless. People barely dared to blink. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant, and Rose stood frozen, her face draining of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Across the lobby, near the fireplace, a couple exchanged stunned glances. Emily, a woman with brown hair tied into a casual bun, widened her eyes. She nudged her husband's arm. David, who had been watching with mild curiosity, frowned. "What?" Emily looked at Taylor, then at Keanu, and suddenly, it clicked. She gasped, "David, oh my God, I think it's her." David turned sharply, his breath hitching. "No way." Emily swallowed hard. What would she be doing here? David's jaw tightened. Maybe trying to have a quiet night. And look how that turned out. Rose's pulse pounded. She could feel the weight of the room shifting against her. People were realizing. And once they realized, there was no undoing it. Taylor Swift wasn't just any guest. And Rose had just treated her in the worst way possible. At the bar, the same man who had secretly snapped a photo earlier hesitated. Should he take another? Start recording? Because whatever was happening right now was about to become a scandal. Rose's body went rigid. She had to fix this. Now. I of course, sir. I can check, she stammered, forcing herself to focus on the screen in front of her. She started typing frantically, searching for the reservation she had so easily dismissed just minutes ago. She prayed for a miracle. Keanu crossed his arms, waiting. Taylor said nothing. She simply watched. And that was worse than any outburst Rose could have imagined. It wasn't rage in Taylor's eyes. It was something else. Something colder. Exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that came from experiencing the same treatment so many times that it no longer surprised you. Rose's fingers trembled as she finally located the reservation. Relief flooded her, and she tried to plaster a smile on her face. "Here it is," she whispered, voice barely steady. "Just a system error." Taylor raised an eyebrow. "Oh, a system error?" Rose turned red. She could feel the scrutiny, the judgment in every pair of eyes locked onto her. Keanu let out a short, humorless chuckle. The sound alone was enough to make Rose's stomach drop. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. The hotel manager appeared, his face pale, as if he already knew something was terribly wrong. His eyes darted from Keanu to Taylor to Rose. He didn't need to ask. He could read it in the air. The entire lobby waited for Keanu's reaction. Rose, desperate, scrambled to redeem herself. "Mr. Reeves, I deeply apologize for any confusion," she rushed out, forcing a tight-lipped smile. She turned toward Taylor, her voice shaking slightly. "Miss Anna, I want to assure you that your stay will be perfect." She was grasping for a lifeline, but there was no lifeline to be found, because when she looked at Taylor again, she saw what everyone else in the lobby saw. The humiliation couldn't be erased. It had already happened, and the damage was done. Keanu took a deep breath. Rose flinched, and then he did something no one in the room saw coming. The silence in the grand lobby of Baccarat was suffocating. It stretched and wrapped around every onlooker, thick with tension. Every pair of eyes was locked onto Keanu Reeves. Rose, who had commanded the situation just moments ago with the cool, effortless authority of someone who had the power to deny or grant entry, now looked like a wax statue, her confidence shattered in an instant. The shift had been almost imperceptible at first. Just a breath, a pause. But then the weight of the moment came crashing down, and she realized she had no control left. Keanu had taken it from her the moment he stepped into the hotel. Beside him, Taylor Swift remained composed, but her gaze spoke volumes. There was no pleading, no desperation. Only the kind of quiet certainty that came from years of knowing exactly how the world worked. She had been here before, in different forms, in different places. This was nothing new. And yet, that didn't make it any less infuriating. Keanu let out a measured sigh, running a hand through his slightly damp hair, still slick from the rain outside. The lobby remained frozen in anticipation. The hotel manager, a man in a well-tailored navy suit, looked like he was about to faint. He understood the gravity of the situation better than anyone. Rose's colleague at the reception desk had abandoned her screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard, staring at her with a mix of sympathy and apprehension. She knew. Everyone knew. Rose swallowed hard, forcing a smile that did nothing to mask the tremor in her voice. "Mr. Reeves," she started, her voice unnaturally high. "I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. We are resolving everything." Taylor's arms crossed. Her voice was even, but there was an edge to it. "Oh, now you're resolving it." Rose's throat went dry. "Yes, it was just a system error. You know how these things happen sometimes." She let out a nervous laugh, but the sound was hollow, swallowed by the silence that followed. No one laughed with her. No one smiled. Keanu didn't smile either. The security guard near the entrance took a small step forward, instinctively sensing the weight of the moment. The energy in the room had shifted. Something was about to happen. Keanu uncrossed his arms slowly, placing both hands on the reception desk, directly in front of Rose. His stance was relaxed, but the intensity in his gaze made her shrink. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice low, calm, but sharp as a blade. Rose straightened up, a forced professional composure taking over. "Yes, sir." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying her. Would this system error have happened if I hadn't arrived? The color drained from Rose's face. The words sliced through her like cold steel, because everyone in that room already knew the answer. No, it wouldn't have. If Taylor had been alone, Rose never would have admitted the error. She would have dismissed her, sent her away to another hotel. Another excuse, another fabricated problem. Because she could. Rose opened her mouth, but nothing came out. There was no excuse she could conjure that would make the truth disappear. She felt the walls closing in, the weight of the silent judgment pressing down on her like a vice. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. The hotel manager finally stepped forward, clearing his throat, desperate to take back control of the situation. "Miss Swift, Mr. Reeves, please allow me to express our deepest apologies." Rose turned to him, hoping, praying, that he would offer her an escape, a way out of this humiliation. But the manager didn't even glance at her. His focus was solely on Keanu and Taylor. "This is not how we treat our guests," he continued, his voice firm. "I assure you, this situation will be corrected immediately." Rose felt herself shrink further, her stomach twisting into a knot so tight it hurt. Keanu remained silent for a long moment, letting the weight of the question linger. Then, his gaze flicked back to her. "And what if it had been someone else?" he asked. "What if Taylor wasn't famous? If she was just another traveler, would you have treated them the same way?" The question hit harder than the last. The lobby was so quiet that the distant hum of traffic outside felt deafening. Rose could feel every single pair of eyes on her, waiting, watching, knowing. And the worst part, she had no answer, because the answer was obvious. Taylor sighed softly, breaking the unbearable silence. "This happens all the time." The manager shifted uncomfortably. He knew. Of course he knew. But knowing and admitting were two very different things. Keanu straightened, shifting his attention from Rose to the manager. "Taylor should have been in a room 20 minutes ago." The manager nearly stumbled over himself in his eagerness to respond. "Why, yes, of course. We're handling everything right away." Rose's hand shook slightly as she typed into the system, her fingers stiff and clumsy. The room keycards printed out, and she slid them across the desk, willing herself to appear unaffected. "Here they are." Taylor took them without another word. Rose waited, hoped, for a parting phrase. Maybe "and it's okay," or "these things happen," but it never came. Taylor didn't look at her again, and somehow, that cut deeper than anything she could have said. Rose didn't move. She remained frozen behind the reception desk, fingers pressing so hard against the polished wood that her nails nearly left marks. What had just happened replayed in her mind on an endless, agonizing loop. Keanu Reeves hadn't raised his voice. Taylor Swift hadn't needed to say much at all. And yet, the impact was devastating. Keanu picked up Taylor's small suitcase and turned toward the elevator. The couple by the fireplace still watched in stunned silence. The man at the bar, the one who had taken a picture earlier, didn't take another. He didn't need to. The moment had already been immortalized. As the elevator doors slid shut behind Keanu and Taylor, Rose felt the weight of the entire night collapse onto her shoulders. She had just made the biggest mistake of her career, and she knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Rose felt the shift in how people looked at her. Before, she had been the gatekeeper of this grand establishment. Now she was just the woman who had tried to humiliate Taylor Swift and failed, miserably. The hotel manager took a deep breath, his expression unreadable, but Rose knew what was coming before he even spoke. "Rose, come with me. Now." Her stomach twisted violently. "Mr. Williams, he raised a hand, cutting her off. "Not here. In my office." The lobby remained eerily still as Rose stepped around the counter. She felt every set of eyes on her. Every step toward the glass doors leading to the administrative offices felt heavier than the last. When the doors shut behind them, the air in the office felt even heavier. The manager exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples before fixing his gaze on her. "Mr. Williams, it was all just a misunderstanding. I swear, I couldn't find the reservation in the system. Don't lie to me, Rose." The words were quiet, but they hit harder than anything else that night. Rose's mouth opened, then closed, because there was nothing left to say. And for the first time that evening, she realized the damage she had done might just be irreversible. Rose had a sinking feeling before the manager even spoke. She could see it in his posture. The way he leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled, as if bracing himself for what came next. "The news is already spreading," he said grimly. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Wordlessly, he turned his monitor toward her. On the screen was a social media post that sent a fresh wave of panic crashing over her. A high-resolution photo of the Baccarat hotel lobby, the post title burning itself into her vision. The Baccarat receptionist tries to humiliate Taylor Swift, and Keanu Reeves steps in to shut it down. Rose felt the air rush from her lungs. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through the flood of comments, each one more damning than the last. "Wow, this happened today? The hotel must be ready to fire this woman." Keanu being Keanu, saving the day as always. Has she lost her job yet? Because honestly, after this, Rose's face drained of color. This can't be happening. The manager's expression remained firm. "It happened, Rose. And now the hotel has to respond." He took a measured breath before delivering the words she dreaded most. "You're fired." The impact was brutal. A sharp, merciless stab to the chest. Rose felt cold, as if all the warmth had been sucked from the room. "Mr. Williams, no." She lurched forward, desperate. "I've dedicated years to Baccarat. This was just a mistake." He stood, cutting her off. "A mistake? You aren't just rude to a guest, Rose. You tried to turn her away. You humiliated her. And what if it had been someone without a famous name?" She had no answer, because she knew the truth. If Taylor Swift had been an unknown, she wouldn't have thought twice about dismissing her. Williams pointed at the screen. "Baccarat cannot be associated with this kind of scandal. Your termination is immediate." The words felt final, like the slamming of a heavy door. Rose wanted to argue, to plead for another chance, but deep down, she knew it was futile. She left the office with blurred vision. The walk to the exit felt endless, each step heavier than the last. The weight of 1,000 judgmental eyes pressed against her back. She grabbed her things, her conscience gnawing at her like never before. As she crossed the lobby, guests whispered. The ones who had seen the ordeal unfold earlier were now relishing its conclusion. Her shame burned hotter than ever. When she reached the grand entrance, she paused. The security guard, a man she had passed 100 times before without a second thought, simply watched her. He didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. She stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool drizzle of rain kissing her skin. She didn't bother to shield herself. What was the point? Without direction, without purpose, she walked. A few hours ago, she had been the receptionist at a luxury hotel. Now, she was the cautionary tale. The example of what happens when you judge someone without knowing who they really are. And the internet would never forget. Meanwhile, back inside the Baccarat lobby, the chaos had settled. The front desk had switched shifts. The manager had given strict orders to ensure Taylor Swift and Keanu Reeves received nothing but the finest service. Emily, the staff member who had recognized Taylor earlier, sat at the bar with her husband, still shaking her head in disbelief. "I bet Rose will never judge someone by their appearance again," David chuckled, swirling the wine in his glass. "If she even gets another job anywhere, that is." Emily glanced toward the elevators where Taylor and Keanu had disappeared hours ago. She had no idea who she was dealing with, and now, she's paying the price. Upstairs, in the luxurious suite, Taylor Swift sat at the edge of the massive king-size bed, lost in thought. The exhaustion from her travels had caught up to her, but the lobby incident still played in her mind. Across the room, Keanu stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the city lights. "She got what she deserved," he said, not turning around. Taylor sighed. "Maybe, but what really bothers me isn't what she did to me. It's knowing that this happens to people all the time. People who don't have someone to step in and save them." Keanu finally turned, studying her face. She looked distant, yet thoughtful. He crossed the room and settled into the armchair across from her. "You know you can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, right?" She let out a small laugh. "That's rich, coming from you." He smiled. "You probably don't remember, but when I was just another struggling actor, trying to make it, I went to this event. A party, one of those places full of important people. You were one of the only ones who stopped to talk to me, treated me like I mattered." Taylor was silent. She tried to pull the memory from her mind, but she couldn't recall the exact moment. But that didn't mean it wasn't true, because it was the kind of thing she would do. She swallowed, touched by his words. Keanu's smile was soft. Maybe now it was my turn to return the favor. The next morning, when Taylor and Keanu entered the lobby, a hush fell over the staff. Conversations dipped into silence. The manager, Mr. Williams, rushed over, his expression carefully composed. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Swift, on behalf of Baccarat, I would like to offer you a complimentary stay and a special dinner as an apology for what happened." Taylor smiled politely. She picked up her suitcase and exchanged a look with Keanu. "We appreciate the offer, Mr. Williams, but I think this time, we won't be staying any longer." The manager forced a smile, though the discomfort was evident in his eyes. Keanu picked up his own luggage and followed Taylor to the exit. As they passed the front desk, some staff members discreetly lowered their heads. No one wanted to make eye contact. The car waiting for them glided smoothly through the streets, the hotel now a memory in the rearview mirror. Taylor glanced over. "And Rose? Do you think she learned anything?" Keanu exhaled, resting his arm along the back of the seat. "She has a choice, learn from it or drown in her pride. It's up to her." Taylor chuckled softly. "Do you always have this an outlook on life?" Keanu shrugged. "I've seen a lot. I know that some people never change. But others, they just need a shock to see the world differently." Taylor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A message from a friend. A video. She smiled. Keanu arched an eyebrow. "What is it?" She shook her head, still smiling. "Nothing. Just a little seed being planted." Keanu smirked. "See? Told you it would make a difference." If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more.